Saudi Arabia, one of the world's biggest oil producers, has pledged to try and reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2060, although it'll still continue to produce fossil fuels. The new commitment was welcomed by Prince Charles in a message to the Saudi Green Initiative Forum, but he warned that there was a dangerously narrow window of opportunity to tackle the climate crisis.
The kingdom's global leadership in energy transition is critically important. I can only say that it is enormously encouraging to see the commitment to diversifying its energy mix, recognizing the cascading economic, social, and environmental benefits that renewable energy provides.
So how important or how meaningful is this commitment? Well, joining me now is Richard Black, who's a senior associate at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Well, how meaningful is it?
Let's start with a couple of good things, if I can. One is they're pledging to cut methane emissions by 30% this decade. That's very important. Methane delivers a short-term, very big hit to the climate, so that has to happen. That's great. The second thing is that this announcement shows that they have at least recognised the scientific reality, which they weren't too keen on just 3 years ago, that CO2 emissions need to fall to net zero around mid-century if we're to have any chance at all of meeting the 1.5 Celsius global warming limit agreed in the Paris Agreement. One very obvious negative to this is they seem to have forgotten the other bit of the other key bit of the science was that we actually ought to be approximately halving carbon dioxide emissions this decade. Now, that doesn't apply evenly to every country. Saudi Arabia might claim it doesn't need to go as fast as the US or richer countries, but it's not a poor country. And actually, this plan appears to allow their emissions to rise this decade rather than fall.
And why are they, you mentioned at the beginning of your answer that they had changed their strategy. Why is that? Are they trying to keep up with the Joneses or the Gretas or whatever?
I think there are probably three things involved here. One is that the US clearly wants this to happen, and the US is a very important ally. I think a second thing is we're coming up to COP26, when traditionally Saudi and the other Gulf oil producers try to make common cause with the least developed countries. They are formally in the same negotiating bloc as the least developed countries and the small island states that are existentially impacted by climate change. So I think this is a play by which they can say, here, we're on your side, look at what we've just done. I think the third thing is, however, and this is the interesting one, is that most of the world plans to get to net zero emissions through renewables, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, this kind of thing, new technology, avoiding use of oil and gas. What the Saudis are trying to do here, I think, and the Australians are trying to do the same thing, is to say, actually, there's an alternative path. We don't really need to do that. We can carry on burning coal, oil and gas, and we can just capture the emissions, and we'll have a fossil fuel-rich, clean future.
And who's behind this new vision? Is it Mohammed bin Salman? Is he driving it?
Yeah, I think so. Over the last few years, this has been one of his key things. Obviously, the Ministry of Energy is very important here, and Ministry of Petroleum and so on. You mentioned earlier in your introduction, of course, that they are planning to export the oil and gas, and that won't be affected by this plan. So, of course, the plan does keep the oil and gas boys happy as well, at least in theory, because they're saying, fine, we'll go green at home, but we'll carry on exporting the oil and gas abroad.
And you think that they will reach, I mean, if they carry out this plan, do you think they will actually reach net zero by 2060? Is that a realistic goal?
I think they may reach net zero by 2060, but I don't think they'll be doing it according to this plan. There's some very, very obvious holes in the plan. For one thing, they're talking about, carbon capture and storage. So you capture the carbon and then you either store it, or you reuse it. You find uses for the carbon dioxide. It's not really clear what they'd be capturing the carbon dioxide from, because in 40 years' time, no one in the world is going to be generating electricity by burning oil. And hardly anyone, I think, is going to be generating it by burning gas. Why would you? Solar will be vastly cheaper than doing that. And the other thing is people have been trying, for a couple of decades now to get this notion going of reusing. Capturing the carbon dioxide is the easy bit, but it's finding the uses for it. That's the stubborn thing. No one's really come up with economically efficient ways of doing that. So my suspicion is if we fast forward to Saudi Arabia in 40 years' time, they might well be at net zero emissions, but actually they'll have done it by the same way as everyone else, which is renewable energy, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, bespoke solutions for industry.
Okay, well, we'll wait and see what happens there. What about COP26? In a week's time, we'll be talking about nothing else, I suspect. What are you going to be looking out for to make sure, or to give us a sign that this summit will actually be a success?
Yeah, so back in the Paris summit of 2015, well, and even before that, the rich world made a number of promises to the poorest countries on the planet. And I think the scene for a successful COP26, the single biggest yardstick that we'll have is whether those promises are actually delivered. We've got the promise to provide $100 billion a year to help the poorest countries by 2020. Is that going to be on the table in a convincing enough manner? What about the promise to have a global goal on adaptation? So rather than just talking about cutting emissions, we actually help the poorest countries to adapt to the climate change impacts that we're already facing, that kind of thing. And then, of course, we will wait to see whether China, for example, makes any pledge on reducing its own emissions further before we get there.
Got to leave it there. Richard Black, thank you very much indeed.